We back, mic'd up, team recaps. Today we are going over the Tampa Bay Gronkowski. How you doing, Mike?
That was so bad. You were hyping for people behind the scenes. You were hyping this up. You were smiling. Well, you couldn't wait to say this whole pun that you had, and that might have been maybe not the worst one yet, but it was right up there. I'm doing all right though. How about yourself?
I don't think that was even close to the worst one. I've had some real rough ones. That might have been one of my better ones. It's not saying much, but
Yikes! All right, so off that note, let's get into the draft class. Mike, what do you think of Tampa Bay's draft class?
they got good value with the first two picks of both of the position of need. I think that's simply put. They have an aging quarterback, obviously Tom Brady going 42, going on 43. They needed that another tackle. They have Donovan Smith on the left side. They definitely needed a right tackle. And to be able to get Tristan Wirfs at 13, it kind of is a steal, and it's perfect. I think it's a perfect fit to put a rookie in at right tackle. He should be able to adjust, fit right in. Great technique. They said he was the best athlete out of all the tackles that came out in the first round. So a great pick there. And then getting Winfield. The buzz started coming late for Winfield. Like, they were starting to argue with him in the late first round. Obviously, he's a thumper. He likes to tackle. He likes to be around the ball. And I think that's exactly what the Tampa Bay Bucs defense needs. I think they kind of needed that strong safety that's really going to be that third level of protection back there. So I think both really solid picks.
I agree. I was kind of surprised that Wirfs slid a little bit, in my opinion, just because of kind of that athletic potential that you were talking about. Him compared to guys like Becton and Wills, and especially Andrew Thomas, like just his athletic potential is through the roof compared to those guys. I think that some of his questions kind of come in when it comes to pass blocking. He's a great run blocker. In recent memory, I can't think of many people who are able to cut off guys and reach guys in terms of like the backside of a zone scheme than Tristan Wirfs. I think that he is not only is he an elite athlete in terms of speed and acceleration and like that quick first step, but he also just so strong. Like this man just rock solid. And I think that he can develop in the passing game. Sometimes he'll let his technique escape him a little bit. His hands, sometimes I've said it before, his hands, he'll widen them out and try and kind of get guys around the shoulder pads. Obviously, he's got to clean that up, start kind of shooting from his chest. But I think that that's fixable. And, the only way that it would have been better is if you were able to stay at 14 and get him. Obviously, John Lynch kind of worked some magic and made them spend a fourth-round pick to trade up. We'll touch on that in a future video because that was just some masterful stuff by Lynch. But even at 13, I do think that Wirfs is not only is he a good short-term selection for when you have Tom Brady, but he's also a good guy for the long term as well. And then in terms of Winfield, man, this is a really interesting pick. Kind of like you said, a lot of people were kind of going to bat for him in that late first round, and honestly, I'm kind of right there with him. I can't argue with it. When I turn on Antoine Winfield, honestly, I kind of see like a Tyrann Mathieu type or a Minkah Fitzpatrick type, kind of that do-it-all safety who can play in the box, play deep thirds, just really an absolute knack for the ball. And that just jumps off the tape. He has a quick first step. He's sometimes overly aggressive, and that's where teams will beat him on play action and whatnot. But, man, just an absolute ball hawk in Winfield. Obviously, he has the family pedigree with his father being an incredibly successful defensive back for like the Vikings and whatnot. But I just think that it's a real steal at 45 when I do think that there's some honest questions as to was he the best safety on the board. So it's like kind of what I'm going to ask you is where do you think that he falls in comparison to like a McKinney or Delpit, or did you also think that Winfield was number one?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it depends on what you're looking for. I think they were all very different safeties. I think they all had different skill sets, and I think that was kind of interesting thing about all three of them is unlike corner, I think that all three could do a different thing for your team. A lot of corners, obviously, if you're going more of a zone coverage or man, but these three safeties are so different in the way they play and kind of what you're looking for. Obviously, they're all ball. I guess you could consider ball hawks, but what kind of plays are they making? This man makes plays. He wants to tackle. He's not afraid to get in there, make some one-on-one tackles against wide receivers, running backs, and kind of be that third-level protector, and then kind of make that aggressive first step. You might not see the interceptions, or maybe he might lack a little bit in coverage compared to the other two, but where he lacks in that maybe it might be a little over-aggressive taking that first step. Man, he will make plays in the run. You'll see plays from him that you're like, wow, I don't think the other two would have made that. So I think for what the Tampa Bay Bucs defense needs, I think he works great.
I agree to an extent. I think that when I kind of picture all three guys, I think of Delpit as more of like that deep free safety. I think of McKinney as kind of like that straight in the box strong safety, and then I think of Winfield as kind of that set piece that you can put wherever you want. I think that he can make plays against the run. I actually do think that he was pretty solid in coverage, especially man coverage. He really surprised me when he wind up in that nickel position against slot receivers and some tight ends. For being a 5'9" guy, like he played bigger than his size. And I think that is kind of the number one positive I can say about him is when you look at him, you aren't like you're not attacking him because he doesn't have the stature of a 6'1" corner or a 6'3" safety or something like that. Like this man plays big, and obviously I realize that on some teams you might need that more play-to-play consistency, but with a guy like Winfield on a defense like Tampa Bay, those kind of splash plays, those big momentum swings, I think that's invaluable to this defense. So to me, it's just a great value. But other than that, are you ready to hop into the offense or what?
Let's get right into it.
Let's get right into it. So, Mike, obviously we have some new pieces here. We're going to talk about Tom Brady, but what are your thoughts on the rest of the offense before we get into Tom?
Yeah, I'm not sure new pieces was the right way to explain these pieces. They might be new to Tampa, but, man, they ain't new at all. Tom Brady, as we already said, 42, 43, and then obviously bringing in Gronk. I said this actually in we did a video for the Gronk trade. Great business move. This team, this offense will put people – actually, there might not be people in the seats, but people be watching. This team is now interesting. Before you were like, obviously that they had a good offense. Jameis threw for 5,000 yards, 30 touchdowns. They had weapons. They were productive. They were actually, I think, even a fun team to watch. But the issue is, as much as Winston used to throw it to his own wide receivers, he also threw it to the defensive backs, which was the problem. So whether this offense really got better, I think it did. Obviously, they have 3 tight ends that all could probably start on a lot of teams. So having the depth there, they have the weapons. Obviously, Chris Godwin's I hope makes that even next step to kind of really blossom. Obviously, last year he looked like a number 1, but hopefully he makes that next step, and him and Mike Evans could kind of just be that duo that really kind of runs this league. And they have the protection. Obviously, when you sign someone like Tom Brady, 42, 43, you need someone protecting him. This man can't handle the hits, the sacks, the pressures. And I think obviously this offensive line, it's young, but it's talented. So I think all around a solid offense, but it's going to be fun to watch. Like, this is a team that everyone's interested in watching. They're in the news. People are wondering, what is Tom Brady and the Gronk show going to look like in Tampa Bay?
I agree. I think that when you said, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin could maybe run the league, or I believe that's what you said. My question is, do they have a quarterback who can get them the ball? And I think that I agree with your assessment on the rest of their offense. It's a really interesting situation to put Tom into. My question is he a schematic fit? I had a couple numbers here that I found really interesting. You want to talk about Brady and his arm. Well, just in terms of yards per attempt, Jameis Winston last year, 8.2, Tom Brady, 6.6. The only 2 quarterbacks who were lower were Mitch Trubisky and Mason Rudolph. That's a little bit questionable. And then you want to talk about completion percentage. We kind of look at Brady as the guy who's going to keep the ball away from opposing teams, but how often is he getting it to his team? Brady last season, 60.8%, Jameis 60.7%. There's kind of a lot of similarities there. Obviously, Tom keeping the ball with his team will be, invaluable, but you kind of got to wonder, like, what are we signing up for here? And then lastly, the one I found most interesting was the ESPN QBRs. I'm not a huge QBR guy. I know you can turn on Skip Bayless and listen to him, banging on the table about it. But Brady last year, 53.7. Mike, what do you think Jameis's QBR was?
I think it was 74.
It was actually a 53.7, the exact same as Tom Brady. So if you're a QBR truther, I don't know how much better you're getting with Tom Brady than you were with Jameis Winston, And I think that there is some value in having that kind of reckless quarterback who isn't going to shy away from really the moment, like a Ryan Fitzpatrick or a Jameis Winston, guys who are just going to throw the ball deep no matter what. And especially when you have receivers like that who can go get it in Evans and Godwin and even, the tight ends and Howard and Bray, now Gronk. I think that a quarterback like Jameis would almost be what's best for this roster. It's kind of an interesting question.
So I'm going to steal – you stole some of my thunder, so I'm going to steal some of your thunder. I agree to an extent. So I think that's kind of the interesting thing about Brady and Gronk coming here. They both came from the do-your-job Patriots. You had a job. You were supposed to do that job the best you can, and you were very set in the position and what you were supposed to do. Whether that was even deflating balls for Tom Brady or sitting in a press box in a Bruins jersey. You were there to do your job. So I think it's interesting that they're coming into offense where this is going to be the most freedom they both had as players. They're going to be able to make their own plays, kind of think I'm not sure, and maybe you're right, Jameis is the player for that. Or maybe, obviously post-LASIK, Jameis, maybe he could have actually kind of cleaned up some of that. Do I think the LASIK is really the problem? No, but who knows? But this is going to be the most freedom a 42-year-old Brady's going to, he's ever had. So I think it's going to be interesting, but does he have enough actual athleticism left or arm strength left to make the plays when they open up, when they kind of break? I'm not sure, but I think it's interesting to see what we're going to see from both Brady and Gronk, to be honest, on the same side.
No, I agree. I do want to clarify, though. When I was saying Jameis, I'm more so talking about a quarterback like Jameis. Obviously, I don't think that Jameis Winston's going to be the guy to bring this team to the Super Bowl, but I do think a quarterback like him would be kind of optimal with this team. And one last stat that I did kind of have to reinforce that point was NFL Next Gen Stats. They keep track of intended air yards, so it's how far the ball is going from the line of scrimmage to where your receiver's catching it. And per target, Jameis was averaging 10.5 yards per throw, whereas Brady was averaging 7.6. So it just kind of goes to show that when you look across all their throws, Jameis was having to force the ball downfield more, and maybe that was by design in Bruce Arians' system, or maybe that was just his play style and dictated by game flow because they were trailing. But I think it is going to be a stark difference from what you saw last year, where you just had a guy almost like a madman, just going out there, throwing the ball wherever he wanted, to whoever he wanted, and no matter what jersey they were wearing, whereas now you're going to have Tom Brady play a much more conservative style of play. Because I kind of wonder, are you trying to fit like a square peg in a round hole,
I agree with you there. So I'm going to spring a question on you. If you're looking for more of that reckless, abandoned kind of quarterback, you're saying not Jameis, but something like Jameis. Is there a quarterback that was on the free agent market this year that you think they should have signed or maybe even drafted? Maybe someone like – I know you're a big Cam supporter. So you think Cam would have been a better answer for what they were looking for?
Yeah, actually, I do. I think that Cam would have been a really interesting answer because he, as you said, this offensive line is pretty solid, but they're not elite or anything. I think that Cam offers you that flexibility to where he can make plays through the air. He has the arm strength to push the ball downfield, but he can also make plays on his feet. I do think that would have kind of been almost the perfect guy to elevate this roster. I mean, you look at guys like Bridgewater or Rivers, and I don't think that they would have been much better than Brady, but I do think a guy like Cam, who just 2 years ago, obviously, we saw the borderline league MVP. I just don't understand why this guy doesn't have a job. Obviously, I advocated for the Denver Broncos to sign him hard in one of our videos, but I do think that would have been a signing, just in terms of straight schematics, a really good signing for Tampa Bay. Now, I do agree with you in a sense that this was not just a football move. This was a move to, make Tampa Bay relevant again, get people in the seats. And does Tom Brady do that better than Cam Newton? I think he does. I think more people are going to tune in to see a 74-year-old Brady and Gronk combo than they would have to see Cam Newton light up the same teams he's been lighting up his entire career in the same division, So it's just an interesting question that personally I would have went for a guy like Cam. Obviously Bruce Arians went otherwise. So where do you fall on that?
Yeah, it was interesting because I know you've been really kind of throwing Cam out there a lot for quarterback needy teams, and you're a really big supporter, and I have been too, to be honest. If you look at my last couple of fantasy teams, man, I'm always rooting on the Cam, and man, he's let me down a couple of years. But how much of that was just his body starting to let him down? So, but at the same part, Brady's body's going to start letting him down. He's 40. this point, man, I'm not sure he has the athleticism. And I think Cam still can offer some of that. If you give him enough protection, he's not getting the pressures. Yeah, I think Cam has more left in the tank to make those plays. I think he has the arm strength to make those throws. So I'm with you, to be honest. But at the same time, I'm a business guy. I'm a finance guy. Tom Brady's the business move, and that's where I can't blame him for making this move.
One other kind of move that I've been thinking about to myself, and it might sound really stupid coming out, but what about if they would have tried to trade for a guy like Dak? You look at what the Cowboys have on their team, and we kind of question, do they need to pay a quarterback $35, $40 million when you have all those weapons? And obviously, kind of the Dak contract negotiations have been in a standstill. I almost wonder if a guy like that would have been perfect for this kind of scheme, to where we have a guy who's still young on the first half of his career, who can get the ball downfield, but also is really good at not forcing throws and generating turnovers. I really do wonder if they could have swung a trade for a guy like that. The only problem then is, what would Dallas have done? It was a good quarterback class in terms of free agents. So, I mean, maybe Tom Brady would have went to Dallas for all we know. But I do think that would have been another interesting move, to where maybe you wouldn't have been signing a guy, but potentially trading for a guy,
Yeah, man, you're swinging for the stars there. I guess I see, but, man, the cap hit you're going to have to take to sign someone like Dak. You're going to sign him long-term, and he's looking for, what, $40 million a year? Not sure I'm on the same page there, to be honest with you. I don't think this team necessarily needs a $40 million a year quarterback, but it's a league that quarterback is heavy. So I guess I see what you're saying. I see where you're coming from, but I'm not sure I'd take the risk on Dak.
So one thing that I do want to offer, though, is we actually just got done talking about how the Falcons, how they have like $211 million committed to next year and 181 committed to 2022. Tampa Bay only has five current starters on their roster that are under contract for 2 years from now, 2022. It's Mike Evans, Ali Marpet, Devin White, Cameron Brate, and Sean Bunting. That's the only five. They only have $60 million total between their entire roster, including a couple backup guys, kickers, punters, and whatnot. So if there was a team who was willing to take a long-term commitment and could eat that $40 million cap hit, I think it would be a team like Tampa Bay. This team really is, with their current kind of situation, it's really a 2-year project, and then you have a clean slate. So while I do agree with you that paying a quarterback $35, $40 million isn't the best path to success, it is a path that this team, I think, could have undertaken. The only problem would have been this season, how would you have handled paying him franchise tag money, because they don't have much left in terms of salary cap dollars. But without the Brady signing, without Gronk's $10 million, you probably would have been able to swing it. So obviously it's kind of a fantasy land scenario. It didn't happen, but it would have been something that I thought would have been super interesting.
Yeah, I agree with you. It would have been interesting. But if you want to talk about interesting, I think actually the side of the ball that a lot of people are not talking about, the defense. So I'm going to start with you, one of our favorite parts to start. What are your thoughts about this D-line? And then if you want to even go a little bit farther, the front seven.
Yeah, I'll go further. That front seven to me is really intriguing. Obviously, Willie Golston aside, that's really six incredibly capable, above average NFL players that I think all, maybe not Vita Vea, he's more of, that prototypical nose one tech, but all of those guys have 7+ sack potential, And then in terms of the linebacking core, you have guys like Levante David and Devin White who can cover really well too. So it's just a really interesting team. I know we'll kind of touch on the secondary in a little bit. That's a little bit more questionable, but really just that front seven is, to me, one of the better ones we've seen in the league. And honestly, it is kind of put together almost through patchwork. When they signed Ndamukong Suh, I don't think they expected him to maintain this level of play. JPP is the same way. Shaquille Barrett kind of came out of nowhere. So it is an interesting scenario where they've kind of almost lucked into this front seven. But now that it's here, I do think that it is a really solid group of guys.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I'm just going to talk. I think he's probably the most underappreciated player in the NFL is Levante David. When you talked about off-ball linebackers the last couple of years, you always went right to Bobby Wagner, Luke Kuechly. Levante David's always been that number 3, and he's been consistently there, and he's been just as good as those other two. I know it's probably not a popular opinion, but maybe it's because he's not playing middle linebacker. He's playing weak side. I'm not sure what it is, but, man, that man just makes plays. And he's consistently done so. You put not a great front four, but front five, but you put a really solid front five in front of him. He's going to continue to do so. I just want to shout out Levante David, still a playmaker. And then adding Devin White year two, obviously he started showing up a little bit end of year after he came back from the injury. I'm excited to see what he does. They have that two off-ball linebacker combo is really solid. There's not too many better in the league, to be honest. So they have athletes from sideline to sideline, and both of them can do that. They can rush the passer. They can cover your tight ends, even some of your slots. I really love that linebacking combo. But I think a part I do not love about this defense as much is that secondary. So I guess, Mike, what's some of your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, we were talking a couple of videos ago about how the Panthers kind of had two number two corners. I think that's the exact thing here. I don't know if Carlton Davis or Sean Murphy-Bunting, I think they're both pretty solid players, but to me they're not along in their development enough to where they're going to be number one and two corners on what many people believe to be a championship team. You know, I think that they're good athletes and they have good ball skills, especially Murphy-Bunting, but it's like, are these going to be the people who are covering Michael Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, Julio Jones, and Calvin Ridley? You know, how is that going to work? And then in terms of Justin Evans, coming off an Achilles injury, didn't play last year. Obviously, we think he has a lot of potential, but the question is how much of that was kind of lost with the Achilles injury. So at the end of the day, I kind of wonder just what do we have in this secondary, and is this going to be kind of the Achilles heel, no pun intended, to their team's winning chances?
Yeah, no, for sure. And the problem with them is they're a little bit kind of in a cap situation that's not really pleasant to get another corner in there. But I do think there are some veterans that are available that they could plug in and hopefully help this team. If not, I think one really interesting one we talked about right before this video was Darqueze Dennard. I think that's a really good number 3 option. Obviously played a lot in the slot. He probably could go right in the slot, help out there if he needs to bounce out to play maybe like a player like Emmanuel Sanders. If he is lined up outside, I think he's a player that can kind of follow that number 2. I think Carlton Davidson is probably going to have to take over at the number 1 spot, and I think it's just how it's going to work. He probably fits really nice against some of those big-bodied wide receivers you'll see, but he probably doesn't fit against those. You just have a speed demon that could beat you deep. He's probably not the guy to do so. A player like Darqueze Dennard might be able to fit that role at a reasonable cap hit. So I think that's an interesting player, and I'll steal your thunder a little bit. I'll just mention him if you want to talk about the fit. I think Aqib Talib would also be a nice veteran that you can get on this defense.
No, I mean, bringing him back to this defense. Obviously, he spent the early majority of his career in Tampa Bay. I think this would kind of be almost the perfect time to bring a guy like that back. We know what Aqib can do in man coverage, and I mean, I'll get right to it now. This is a team that plays a lot of man coverage because, as you'll see last year, this team led the NFL in blitz rate, and by a pretty wide margin as well. So, as we talked about, they have that front 7. They are bringing a lot of that front 7 each play, and they're kind of leaving the Carlton Davises out on an island, you know. So I do think a guy like Aqib Talib who could teach those guys some, you know, help them refine their technique, and even in the short term, help play probably at a higher level than those guys. Honestly, I think that would be a really interesting signing because at the end of the day, I don't know if this football that they played last year is sustainable. You know, one thing that just kind of, in terms of like football theory, I think there's only 2 reasons that you would have such a high blitz rate. They're blitzing on more than 50% of passing plays. It would be because you're either super confident in your offense and can afford to kind of risk it because you know that you'll be able to make it up. I think that applies to like the Ravens. Or you're a team who's losing and desperately needs to create a turnover and make, you know, momentum shifting plays. And I think that is more so what we see with the Tampa's, Arizona's, Jets, and Cleveland here. So I do think that what this team needs is either to kind of cut back on the blitzing, help out those secondary guys, or they have to improve that secondary in some way if they kind of plan on playing this isolation cover 1 style football. Because at the end of the day, I don't know if this is going to be successful deep in the season and into the playoffs, you know?
No, I'm with you there.
So from there, I mean, are you ready to get right into the schedule, or?
Let's get right into it.
Let's get right into it. So, Mike, I'm going to hit you right away. What are some games that interest you here coming into 2020?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We did the rest of this division already, and we were talking about how difficult the schedule is. this does not look like that difficult of a schedule. I think they've actually kind of got lucky, especially out of the 4 teams. I think this is by far the easiest way to get to the playoffs. But obviously, I think an easy one to pick out week 1, the Saints. It's gonna be a fun game. Breeze, Brady. I think it's gonna be a competition. It'll be interesting. Obviously, Brady being new to the Buccaneers, most of the Saints team returning. I'm not sure it'll be a great game competitive wise, but it'll obviously be fun to watch. Let's see how he adapts in that first week against a defense that we've already said is basically has two strings depth for days of players that can make plays. So I think that's a really fun one to watch. And I think another one, I've been picking them out because I think it's a fun team all around that people might not be giving enough credit to. But I think week 4, the Chargers, I think that's going to be a fun game. I'm interested to see that athletic defense go up against, obviously, the aging Brady and Gronk. I think that's going to be a fun one to watch. They're going to bring some different looks. You're going to see some players in different spots, kind of the way they use Derwin and Desmond King. So I think that's going to be a fun one. I could see it maybe being a really ugly game really early for Brady, and we start questioning, was he the right pick and play for the Bucs?
No, I agree. I think that, one that kind of jumps off to me is, considering a lot of people think that Tampa is going to be a Super Bowl team, is Kansas City. I feel like a lot of people would say that is maybe going to be a Super Bowl preview, but personally, I just can't get there. So I think it'll be a really interesting opportunity, though, to see how they stand up against some of the NFL's best. Obviously, you talked about that with both the Saints games, but I do think that the Chiefs game obviously reinforced that. So one thing I did want to mention to you, though, was Vegas has their win total set at 9.5, which is, I believe, 5th highest in the league, actually. So, Mike, where do you fall on that?
I'm counting the games that I think they can win. I think they can win any of them. I think they're a competitive team. Obviously, they're good talent-wise. I'm just trying to get the not guarantees, but almost guarantees that they should win the game if they're going to be legit. I'd say the over. We've already went over the NFC North. I don't think it's a great division. I think they've taken a step back. So I think those are both very winnable games. Obviously, the Lions and Bears are very winnable games. I think they got the luckiest draw out of the NFC East, getting the Giants. That if they don't win it, they should pack up now and call it a loss. So, and obviously they got other than the Saints, probably got the easiest interdivision games, having to play the Panthers and Falcons twice, who we've already talked about are lesser talent. I'd say the over. I'd say the over on that, to be honest.
I think it's a really interesting question because, like you said, they kind of are being direct beneficiaries of being 3rd place last year. Obviously, they had the same record as the Falcons, but the Falcons had the tiebreaker over them, so they kind of fell into that 3rd place schedule. And as a result, they get the Rams opposed to Seahawks or 49ers. They get the Giants instead of Cowboys or Eagles. I think that is really where we're going to see this team have an advantage over, say, the Saints or some of those other wildcard teams, because they are coming from being sub 500 and they do have an easier strength of schedule. Personally, though, I just wonder how long is it going to take for this team to mesh. Like I said, I don't know if the play styles necessarily make sense, especially schematically on offense, and then some of that blitz stuff I was talking about on defense. So I do wonder if a team like Carolina could upset them, or maybe a team like the Broncos, who we talked about how great their offense is starting to look, maybe outside Drew Lock. But you do kind of wonder if teams like that, teams that are young and have pieces, if they'll be able to upset this team as they try and find their rhythm, and at what point is cut off to where it's like, okay, we have to see Tampa Bay win. Because I do think there's a scenario where they could maybe struggle with the Panthers and then lose back-to-back games against the Broncos and Chargers, and now here we are 1-3 going into week 5. I think that's a huge possibility that a lot of people just think that, Tom Brady, great quarterback, and I do agree with that obviously all time. We're talking about 43-year-old Tom Brady right now. And I think that we saw his play start to deteriorate last year, really the last 2 years, but especially late last year. And you got to wonder, how much does he still have to offer? So while I do think a lot of those games at the back half of the schedule are definitely winnable, the question is how much of the front half are they going to be afforded to lose, especially considering it is going to be a shortened off season. That's one thing to take into account. You are bringing quite a few pieces in, as we said, Tristan Wirfs at right tackle. You're bringing in Brady, you're bringing in Gronk. And it's like, how long you're not going to have a full training camp to kind of get together at this point. It doesn't seem like that anyway. So you got to wonder how much of that familiarity, at least with the playbook and with the rest of his players, is Brady going to have? So to me, I would maybe lean and take the under. I still think they could maybe sneak in as a wild card team at that 9-win mark. I really do, but I don't think that they're going to beat the Saints for the division.
No, I'm with you there.
So you're with me there, but to all the viewers at home, if you are with Mic'd Up, make sure you guys are, as always, leaving a like, a comment, and leaving a subscribe. As always, if you guys have a team that you want us to do next, Mike, if somebody says in the comments, hey, can you guys do the Cincinnati Bengals, who are we doing next?
The Joe Burrow Cincinnati Bengals.
We are doing the Cincinnati Bengals. And honestly, at this point, there's not that many teams left to pick out. I think now we only have 12 left. So if you're a fan of AFC North or AFC East or the NFC West, get your teams in now. So that's all we're going to say, because as of right now, Mike, what do you got?
Nothing. I think we mic'd up. We micing out. Deuces.
Peace, guys.